I've created all of these slides with a sort of a theme on each slide. So one of the primary benefits for the animal is that trees in their environment offer them the ability to care for their bodies. If we take social licking as part of body maintenance, then these cattle can spend up to 2 hours every 24 hours on body care. And what being able to rub and scratch different body parts can do for them is remove dead hair, dead fleece, which is becoming increasingly important for self-shedding sheep. It can also remove external parasites, so you've got ticks, that kind of thing, and scratching can also remove seeds that can embed themselves in the skin. So a really important thing for an animal. And I've created this group of slides so you can see that offering a variety of shapes and sizes and heights enables the animal to access most body parts. And those body parts that the animal can't really access for itself are usually covered through social relations with other animals. Okay, so this next slide really looks at trees in the landscape and how they can act as a buffer for both the plants and the animals. So the top two images, on the left-hand side is an image of, I think it's a downy birch, but it's certainly pitlockery in winter, and you can see that the only green grass is under even a bare canopy. What trees can do is raise the temperature by up to 6 degrees under the canopy during the winter. And the image on the right-hand side, where you can see the only green grass is under the apple tree. This is in Wiltshire last summer in the drought. So it can increase your grazing opportunities. So those of you who remember this slide from Jim McAdams this morning, this is in reality what it's doing. The bottom two slides are looking at shelter from rain on the left-hand side. The cows look really relaxed, so I've popped in this little image just above it. These are the cows on the other side of the lane, looking quite unhappy about being stuck out in the rain. And on the right-hand side, you've got an image of cows sheltering in a cold April wind. And sorry, Rob, I'd quite like to take issue with your response out in the field about shelter. It's enshrined in one of the 5 freedoms. Animals should have the right to be able to seek shelter. And I don't really like animals being reduced to what's going on inside the room, and they're a bit more complicated than that. If we take for example, wind and cold weather, then if you have an ambient temperature of 2 degrees and you bring in a 24 kilometre an hour wind, and your effective temperature is now -7, so which is really quite something. And at the same time, if you consider that for every 1 degree below an animal's critical temperature, it requires a 2% increase in feed to maintain body condition. But I'm not really sure that we should be asking the animal to do that when all it needs is to be able to seek a little bit of shelter somewhere. Okay, so if we think at the beginning of life, the thing that trees can do also is increase survival rates of all young stock, but not just for hyder species, also for the traditional, what we consider to be a follower species, the sheep. We can see that by offering shelter you can increase survival rates in lambs by a good 30%. And what it also does for the lambs is that when you're giving them shelter, they are using less energy on keeping warm, so they're using more on growing, so you get better returns on your stock. Maybe it's not easy to see the bottom image on the right hand side, but somewhere in the middle of there is a sow's snout. And this is a nest that she's built for herself with access to trees. So she's effectively dug a pit, filled it with grass, and then covered it herself. So on a global level, probably the single most important thing that trees do is offer shade for animals. Dairy cows, particularly at around 21 degrees, they're starting to seek shade, and we find that their behaviours without shade are disrupted quite significantly, so you'll get a lot more loafing behaviour, you get a lot less settled resting behaviour, less rumination, and certainly less feeding, and to the point where beef cattle can take up to 3 weeks longer to reach the same body weight as compared to those with access to shade. If we look at silvopastoral systems where they're designed well, the animals utilise the system a lot more evenly, so you get a lot better spread of muck effectively, so you've got your nitrogen, your phosphorus, etc. being distributed more evenly over the system, which is obviously a greater benefit, but you then also get less disrupted behaviour patterns, so they're behaving like the animal that you would expect them to be, proper resting, and the resting behaviour is much more active resting, if you like, so you get decent rumination behaviour also. So if we turn our attention to trees as feed, the images across the top are just different domestic animals. If we want to offer feed as browse, then you've got to consider browse height. For cattle, this is around 2 metres. For sheep, it's about 1.2 metres, and for goats, it's non-existent, effectively. We're talking about an animal that's considered a vertical grazer. They also behave quite differently to other livestock in the sense that if they do get access to different trees, they'll finish off one as much as they can really before they move on to the next one. So they can be quite difficult to manage. And I should say that if you do have browse, then it's recommended that you don't let animals browse more than 50% canopy, otherwise the recovery rate is too slow for that tree. The lower pictures show other ways of managing the trees in the landscape. So we've got a hedgerow that's been browsed. The limitation of this approach is that they can only browse the bits that they can get access to, and maybe that's okay if there are enough hedges around. The middle image is actually an ancient coppiced oak woodland in Denmark that used to be browsed by horses, the working horses. On the right hand side we've got some sheep where you've got a system that is cut and drop system. This farmer in Berkshire drops his, fells the branches, allows his sheep to browse the branches, and once they're cleaned he cuts them up for his own wood fire system. Works very well for him. Then on the left hand side, the right hand side, left, sorry, left bottom side we've got a cut and carry system. For these particular pigs it's enrichment, but is a system that's well used particularly with wilting or as tree hay. In the middle at the bottom we've got a trailer of tree hay for goats, dairy goats in France, and on the right hand side we've got some pollarded trees from Sweden. Very old trees for a very old system.
Just explain tree hay.
Tree hay is dried, branches that are cut and dried. You can also make silage out of them, but yeah, tree hay. Yeah, I'm not going to spend too long on this, but 2 points to make. That trees, in nutritional terms, can be every bit as good as grasses in the same environment. So in the middle of this, in this slide, you've got alfalfa and ryegrass here as examples. You've got effective degradable nitrogen here with the mean across here, and you've got crude protein this way with the average crude protein here. You can see here the outstanding nitrogen source is mulberry. Lime, pretty good, and Italian alder, pretty good. But if you look on the right hand side, you'll see a list of palatability which the Scottish government have created in the Woodland Grazing Toolbox, and you'll notice that alder is at the very bottom of palatability. It's one of the very few trees that rarely need protection, even from deer. It gets a good reputation for being a nitrogen fixing tree, and in that sense it's a very useful tree to have in a system, but if you're thinking about feeding animals, don't bank on alder as a feed source. It's not to say that they won't browse some of it, but really not willingly. And I just want to make one more point about palatability, because we tend to think of palatability as merely the flavour of something, but it's so much more complex than that. It's a really complicated story of the taste and post-ingestive feedback. So you've got mechanical processes and you've got chemical processes going on, and it's a really complex interrelationship. And so if something is of benefit to the animal, the flavour of it, the taste of it in the mouth, can be overridden, if you like. So for example, if you've got animals that have a high parasite burden, then their intake of tannin-rich feeds goes up. Now tannins are bitter, but the relationship between the tannins, which work on the third instar of the larvae, they reduce the size and they reduce the number of them getting to adulthood, so they produce fewer eggs. And the animals know this, and their intake of tannin increases despite the bitter content of it, the taste of it. And I should say there's also an example now of people working with lambs and vitamin E. Vitamin E is in browse, so if you're talking about Mediterranean systems or systems which are very dry, there's very little green grass and vitamin E is very low, they will take on a much bitter flavour. If they are deficient in vitamin E, they will take on a bitter flavoured feed until they've reached balance in vitamin E. And this has been done as an experiment, and the lambs were artificially made deficient. So the researchers knew they were deficient, but the lambs were aware of this deficiency at almost the same rate, and they took on the more bitter feed and regained balance before any kind of effect could be measured by the scientists. This can be quite a sophisticated system from the animal's point of view. But it doesn't mean to say that they have a kind of wisdom. It doesn't mean to say that this is necessarily conscious learning. It can be, because some of these feedstuffs have traits that go with them. They taste of something like salt. There's no, you can taste what salt is, and some of these other things have other flavours or other attributes that go with them. But it doesn't mean to say that the animal's behaviour is necessarily a conscious reaction. Yeah, so in terms of intake of browse on the left-hand side, yet something else from the toolbox, the graph. This is on an annual basis, so on the left-hand side we've got cattle, and annually they will take in about 12% browse of their overall diet. Sheep is about 20%, and goats is about 60%. But on the right-hand side of each one, you can see how much that can increase depending on conditions. So cattle, the whole intake can go up to about 55%. And the kind of environments that this might happen in is a hot summer or early spring, when you've got the shoots of young trees that are highly palatable. On the right-hand side, we've got a study that was done in Belgium with some heifers that were given access to a planted hedge, a deliberately planted hedge with different species in it. So you've got field maple, sycamore, hornbeam, dogwood, hazel, hawthorn, ash, black poplar, oak, false acacia and elder. And over the whole summer they recorded the time they spent browsing, so that's about 20% of their feeding time in spring, which has reduced quite substantially in late summer to just over 5%. But the species that they preferred to eat in this time were the hazel, the hawthorn and the hornbeam. Yeah, so this slide is really about imbalances. And I've spoken a little bit about that it need not necessarily be a conscious action on the part of the animal, but it also can be. So on the left-hand side, we've got an animal. I don't know if you can see this, but it's a young steer eating a rabbit. So it's got half a rabbit out of its mouth. I mean, it's quite a drastic image, really, but this animal is kept on ground that is very, very poor in phosphorus, and they're not supplemented. And this is the thing about animals, when you put them in a diverse environment and they have a need for something, they also have an ability to go looking for it. This is obviously not recommended, but there is a lot of phosphorus and a lot of calcium in bones. So in this environment, this is the solution for this animal. On the right hand side, you've got sheep eating willow. Willow is, as we know, a good source of salicylic acid, which is the origin of aspirin. Not only a painkiller, but also anti-inflammatory and antibiotic properties too. And interestingly enough, some components of salicylic acid are being used to treat TB in humans. I won't say anything more about that, about animals, but it's still nevertheless interesting. On the left-hand side, although this has nothing to do with trees, this is a farmer who, in America, an organic dairy farmer who gives his animals access to bicarbonate of soda, which acts as a buffer on the stomach, and he notices that the intake of bicarbonate of soda increases dramatically as the animals move from fresh grass to ensiled grass for the winter feed. Just want to talk about the image on the right-hand side with the Guernsey cow eating out of the hedge. I mean, really this is about tannins, but of course trees are an incredibly good source of tannins, as are some forbs. But what this can help with is parasite management. So we've got the tannins that are reducing the number of parasites, season by season, by reducing the size of adults, the number of adult larvae that mature. And the other benefit that we have by increasing tannins in the diet, up to about 5%, you really don't want more than about 5% tannins in the diet, but up to that point, what it can help with also is rumen bypass protein. So you've got really good quality proteins coming from the tree fodder, and the tannins are helping some of that protein bypass the rumen and delivering it to the intestine as high quality protein. And a third thing about the tannins, of course, is that they help with methane. So the methane produced from willow is less than half that produced from alfalfa. A very quick thing about getting it right and getting it wrong. Putting trees into a system has to be thought through. Too few trees and you'll create problems such as compaction. It's perhaps not easy to see here, but these cows, young Hereford cattle, crowded in this one bit. All of this is dead after the animals have left, but it increases risk of disease also. They're lying very, very close together. You can see here the level of compaction that's been, and treading that's been created in this little copy here. Also, disease and infections. You've got a Guernsey cow here with a blackthorn puncture. Flies can be a particular problem if you get it wrong. Too few trees, or the wrong kind of trees, or typically woodland edge rows, and you can get problems with flies. However, if you get it right, if you plant the right trees and you plant the right number of trees, then you not only increase biodiversity, but you increase the number of predators. So when you do a head count of biting flies, you can find that they're up to 40% lower in tree-enriched environments than on open pasture. And I put the images of the chickens in there because, of course, they're really good predators as well. So, and the image of the beetle here illustrates that also in a very well-designed pasture, Silvopasture, you've got more species of beetle that are far more active, around about 40% more active than beetles on open pasture. So they're getting rid of the muck and they're getting it into the ground really quite quickly.